Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Paul Clark and welcome to my studio. So, what have I got for you lovely lot today? Well, I've just got back from my cycling tour with my four buddies. We are the leisurely riders with the emphasis on the word leisurely. Now, we've been doing this now for 25 years, same group of guys. And whenever we're cycling, I'm always looking out for great locations and things to paint. So we're going to be having a go in line and wash in a very loose style, this lovely old village church. And it's a lesson on how you can really loosen up your brushstrokes and get that more natural flowing feeling to your work. And just before the tutorial, there's a very short video, it's only about a minute and a half long, of our trip. So I hope you enjoy that. And in the meantime, come and join me and we'll paint this step by step together. Off we go! The intrepid riders cycle through the beautiful countryside of Hampshire, stopping off at manor houses and pretty little villages. Oh, that might make a good painting. And a little off-piste cycling. Oi, look where you're going. And what about the odd steam railway? Here she comes. And no tour would be complete without the odd pub stop. So we stayed in the ancient city of Winchester. And if you like your mythology, this is King Arthur country, where we went in search of the legendary Round Table for King Arthur and his knights. Surprisingly, this is a replica, but it's an 800-year-old medieval replica, and it has the seating positions marked for the 24 knights, although I couldn't spot the most famous of them all. Anyway, more beautiful scenery to cycle by. Coming through! But no trip is complete without at least one puncture stop. The only decision now to make is where to next year. Here is the reference photo taken by Johnny. I was too busy stuffing my face with licorice all sorts at the time. So for today's materials, my paper is some Bockingford Rough. It's £200, nice and thick, so won't need stretching. But of course, any decent watercolour paper will do. And my colours today are cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, cobalt blue, phthalo blue, a little touch of burnt umber, burnt sienna, sap green and some Payne's grey, and just two brushes from my range, a number 12 and number 6 round. And here's the pencil sketch, which as always is free to download from my website, link in the description below. Now with all my line and washes, I always like to have a pencil guide first. Then I'll be using this Micron graphic with a 0.5 nib, but any waterproof pen will do, even a standard ballpoint pen. Now, some of you may know that I'm a big fan of Edward Wesson. In fact, I've done several tutorials on his work in my inspiration series, link above if you haven't seen them. So I'm going to rip him off, be inspired by that nice, loose, jagged line work that he gets, with lots of vertical and diagonal hatching lines. Keeping that pen work nice and loose with lots of fluid lines. Now, I have speeded up this section just to make it a lot quicker. This drawing stage did take me about 15 to 20 minutes. Wouldn't it be great if we really could draw this fast? The way I always like to treat my line and wash paintings is to put in enough line work that the finished drawing stands alone as a completed piece, even if you decide not to add in any colour. And I'm just making sure that ink has totally dried before rubbing out the pencil. Off we go! Using my number 12 brush, I'm starting with a nice watery mix of yellow ochre and softening some of the edges with clean water. Then straight into the gaps. This is a mix of cobalt blue and phthalo blue, leaving plenty of spaces for those white clouds. So the church walls themselves is that lovely honey colour, so I'm using a mix of yellow ochre and burnt umber. Again, getting in nice and quickly, nice, confident, easy brush strokes, and I don't mind if I leave some little white gaps. It all adds to the effect. And I'm using the same mix for the gravestones here, but I've just added in a little touch of Payne's Grey just to tone the colour down slightly. And the wonderful thing about working with line and wash is you don't have to be too accurate with your colour. The line work holds it all together for you. And here, while it's still wet, I'm just dropping in a few little blobs of Payne's Grey. So for these distant trees, I'm using my normal mix of cadmium yellow and cobalt blue, but clearly it's very heavy on the blue side, which also helps to throw these trees further back. And I'm painting these with really quick brush strokes, picking up texture of the paper, really trying hard to get a loose, unlaboured feel. It's all about trying to paint with as minimal brush strokes as possible. Just skimming here the brush across the top of the paper, and here I'm just added in some Payne's Grey to get some nice dark values towards the bottom. Here the same two colours again, but you can see I've been much heavier on the yellow to give out just a much brighter yellowy green. And because both those two primaries that I'm using are both slightly on the warm side, it's helping to give a slightly more muted green. And I'm guessing this is a yew tree, which you find in just about every churchyard in Britain. And I've darkened the green here just simply by adding in slightly more cobalt blue. Now it's always worth considering where generally your direction of light is coming from. And you can tell from the reference photo below that it seems to be coming from the right directly over my right hand shoulder. So the shadow side of most trees will be on the left. And here I'm just adding in a little bit of warmth with some burnt sienna directly into the wet wash. The roof, and this is a fairly simple wash of burnt sienna, just nice and quick. I'm really not worried about being too neat. And while still wet, in with a little touch of burnt umber. So now we need to let this totally dry, so it's a perfect time for a short break. And how about a nice cold lager? Next, using my number 12 brush, I'm just part wetting here some of the foreground, then dropping in straight away some yellow ochre into the left hand side, but I'm leaving some little white areas at the bottom. Here I've just dropped in a little bit of sap green to add a little bit of brightness and greenery to the mix, just carefully painting around all the gravestones. I just feel that leaving some areas unpainted adds a nice little artistic touch. Now you can see why when I give you the colour breakdowns below, they're never going to be totally accurate because I always pick up stray colours from my messy palette, but that's all part of the fun. Referencing the photo, you can see as I move over to the shorter cut grass on the right, I'm painting in a more greenish colour by dropping in some sap green. And as before for those dark greens, just adding in some cobalt blue. Another favourite trick of mine is to use the sharpened wooden end of my paintbrush to scratch and score into the paper. It just gives you a darker version of whatever colour you have below. And I gotta be honest, I just enjoy doing it. And while the wash is still damp, I'm just splatting in some random texture with a little bit of dark green, just in the foreground here. And I'm just filling in this corner here. I just feel I've got a little bit too much of the white unpainted paper. These are all decisions you can make as your painting evolves. Now it's time for those lovely cast shadows, and I'm using some burnt umber, and these are falling diagonally across the church roof. And then vertically down on the upright walls. And using the same colour here for the wooden porch. And if you're interested, this is St Mary's Church in the village of Crawley. Now that's not the one in West Sussex with the big airport. Now there's been a church on this site for more than 1,000 years, with this one being built around the 1380s. And you may be pleased to know that no one has been buried here since 1890. I have. Anyway, moving on. And I've always loved these diagonal cast shadows that you get from buildings in bright sunlight. Now I'm sticking with my number 12 brush for these details, but if you feel more confident with a smaller brush, please do. I just find using a bigger brush just stops you from fiddling, and you can get most things in with one simple brush stroke, which will all help in getting that looser, more direct approach. So for these dark shadows, I'm using a mix of burnt umber and Payne's grey, and it's important that you keep that right hand edge unpainted, which is the side being hit by the light. Again, I'm working fairly quickly, just trying to be as economical as I can with each brush stroke. And here for the path, a very watery mix of the same colour. So I just want to introduce a little bit of texture into these trees, so I'm just lightly skimming the top of the paper using a fairly dry mix of a dark green. And here with these foreground grasses, I'm just flicking my brush quickly to create that nice tapered ends to each stroke. And you can always practice this stroke on a scrap piece of paper first. Next, I've switched to my number 6 brush and I'm going to put in just a few little bits of suggestive detail. Less is more. Always leave your viewers something to fill in themselves. So for these windows, don't be afraid to come in really nice and dark. And for this colour, I've just added in some Payne's Grey. Next, with some dark green, I'm painting in the car shadows from the gravestones, and this will really help to locate them onto the ground. And obviously I'm trying to paint them all roughly in the same direction. And here a little bit of negative painting with a very dark value green. These shadows will help to give the shape of the grasses below. And here with these shadows, I'm trying to paint the angle and the texture of the grass. And here with these long choppy brush strokes, I'm just trying to create that illusion of the long dried grass. And here I'm using quite a thick paint mix, which is helping to give me this dry brush effect, picking up the texture of the paper. Changing the angle of grass here. Grass doesn't always grow in the same direction. Maybe it's been caught by the wind. And back to the church, and with the merest bit of detail, I'm just going to suggest the odd little stone here and there. Just keep it simple again. Yes, it's mixed media time, and I'm just taking a creamy coloured pastel pencil just to put in a few of these lighter coloured dry grasses directly on top of the dark green. Next, something I always like to do with my line and washes is that once that colour work has dried, I'm going to come back in with a black pen and just bring out some of the detail I've lost. But again, not overworking it. Even putting some of that hatching back in just helps to give it that nice little artistic touch. Always knowing when to stop is the difficult thing, and I can see now I'm just beginning to put in unnecessary detail. And here's something I missed out, that flagpole, and I'm using a white Posca ink pen. And here I'm using a fatter tip version for these little daisies, which weren't in the original picture, but I just thought they added a nice little touch. There we go, all done, and I tried to limit myself and do this within 2 hours, but it took about 2 hours 20 minutes. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and you'll give it a go. Remember, make it your own. Just use my painting as a guide. And of course, this one does work as a conventional watercolour if you don't want to do the line and wash. But most important of all, please don't forget to like, subscribe if you haven't already. It is free. Leave a comment. I do read every single one. Can't always reply to them all. And of course, I look forward to seeing you all again next week for another Watercolour Wednesday. Now I'm going to try and remove my bike from the studio.